We witness today a peculiar phenomenon, societies that pride themselves on rational organization descending into the most irrational forms of political disorder. The streets of our cities echo with revolutionary fervor, our institutions crumble under ideological pressure, and our public discourse degenerates into tribal warfare. Yet this chaos is not accidental. It follows necessarily from a more fundamental rupture in human consciousness that began centuries ago with the systematic desacralization of existence. When a civilization loses its connection to the sacred, the very foundation of order collapses, leaving human beings grasping desperately for substitutes that promise transcendence but deliver only imminent catastrophe. The political chaos consuming Western societies represents the symptom, not the disease. The disease is spiritual, the systematic desacralization of existence that began with the Enlightenment and has reached its logical conclusion in our time. What we call political problems are manifestations of a deeper disorder, the disorder of souls that have forgotten their orientation toward the divine ground of being. This investigation will reveal how the loss of sacred consciousness inevitably produces political chaos, and why recovery of order requires nothing less than a restoration of humanity's constitutive relationship with transcendent reality. We shall examine the sacred as the foundation of all authentic order, trace the systematic process of desacralization in modernity, analyze how political movements become substitute religions, and discover the path toward genuine restoration of order through recovered transcendent consciousness. Chapter 1: The Sacred as Foundation of Order. To understand how loss of the sacred creates political chaos, we must first comprehend what the sacred actually is and why it serves as the indispensable foundation of all genuine order. The sacred is not merely a category of religious experience, it is the fundamental structure of reality itself, the tension between temporal existence and eternal ground that constitutes human consciousness. Throughout my years investigating the crisis of modernity, first in my exile from Nazi Austria, then through decades of analysis in America, I have discovered that authentic political order has always emerged from humanity's recognition of this sacred dimension. The sacred represents the experience of transcendent reality breaking into temporal existence, creating the tension that orders both soul and society. When classical philosophers spoke of the divine, when biblical prophets proclaimed the Word of God, when Christian mystics described their encounters with ultimate reality, they were articulating the same fundamental experience, consciousness discovering its participation in a reality that transcends yet grounds temporal existence. This is not abstract metaphysics but lived experience accessible to any consciousness willing to receive it. This participation in transcendent reality provides the ordering principle for both individual souls and political communities. The sacred establishes hierarchy, purpose, and meaning by revealing that existence has a structure that transcends human will and construction. When political order acknowledges this transcendent dimension, it gains legitimacy not from human agreement but from participation in divine order. The ruler governs not by arbitrary power but as participant in cosmic justice. Laws derive authority not from majority will but from their approximation to eternal law. Citizens obey not from fear or calculation but from recognition of legitimate authority grounded in transcendent truth. Consider how classical Greek philosophy emerged from the experience of transcendent reality. When Plato described the philosopher's ascent from the cave of illusions to the vision of the good, he was articulating the sacred experience that grounds all authentic knowledge and political wisdom. The vision of eternal forms provides the standard by which temporal arrangements can be judged and ordered. Similarly, when Hebrew prophets proclaimed divine justice against human corruption, they were drawing upon their participation in sacred reality to critique and reform temporal order according to transcendent standards. The medieval synthesis achieved perhaps the most complete integration of sacred and political order in Western history. The concept of divine right of kings, properly understood, did not grant arbitrary power to rulers but subordinated political authority to divine justice. The king ruled as God's representative, bound by natural law and accountable to eternal standards. This created a hierarchy of authority that prevented both tyranny and anarchy by grounding human authority in transcendent source. The sacred thus provides what no purely human construction can, an objective standard by which to measure political arrangements, a source of authority that transcends human manipulation, and a purpose that gives meaning to individual sacrifice for common good. Without this sacred foundation, political order becomes mere organization of power relationships, lacking both legitimacy and direction. The result is what we witness today: political institutions that command neither respect nor obedience, laws that reflect only the will of the stronger, and citizens who seek their private advantage while the common good disintegrates. Chapter 2: The Systematic Desacralization of Modernity. The political chaos of our time did not emerge suddenly but represents the culmination of a systematic process of desacralization that has been unfolding for centuries. This process began with the Enlightenment's project of replacing sacred authority with rational construction, but its roots extend deeper into the gnostic currents that have always challenged transcendent order. What we witness today is the final stage of this desacralization, the complete evacuation of sacred content from political life and its replacement with secular ideologies that promise salvation through human action alone. The Enlightenment promised to liberate humanity from the superstitions of traditional religion and establish order on purely rational foundations. The philosophes proclaimed that human reason, freed from religious prejudice, could construct perfect social arrangements based on scientific understanding of human nature and social dynamics. Yet this liberation was actually a substitution, replacing genuine transcendence with immanent constructions that promised the same satisfaction as sacred experience while remaining within the bounds of material existence. This redirection represents what I have termed the immanentization of the Eshiten, the attempt to realize in temporal existence what can only be fulfilled in transcendent reality. Instead of acknowledging humanity's constitutional dependence on divine ground, modern consciousness seeks to construct perfect order through human reason and will alone. Science, progress, revolution, democracy, nationalism, all these become substitute religions promising ultimate fulfillment within history rather than through participation in eternal reality. The systematic nature of this desacralization becomes clear when we examine the transformation of modern institutions. Universities that once sought wisdom in pursuit of divine truth now reduce education to technical training and ideological indoctrination. The medieval university was a sacred institution dedicated to understanding reality in its fullest dimensions. The modern university is a factory for producing specialists who know everything about nothing and lack wisdom about anything that matters. Legal systems that once approximated eternal justice through natural law now serve as instruments of social engineering, treating law as arbitrary human construction rather than discovery of transcendent principles. The common law tradition, with its assumption that law reflects permanent features of human nature and divine order, gives way to positivist jurisprudence that recognizes only human will as the source of legal authority. Art that once mediated transcendent beauty and elevated souls toward divine reality now celebrates transgression and nihilism, treating beauty as bourgeois prejudice and seeking to shock rather than inspire. The cathedral builders who created architectural prayers in stone are replaced by architects who design monuments to human alienation from cosmic order. Even churches often abandon their transcendent mission to become agencies of social reform, treating religion as useful myth for achieving political goals rather than as participation in divine reality. The social gospel replaces the eternal gospel, and salvation becomes a this-worldly project of eliminating poverty and injustice rather than ordering souls toward God. Each stage of this desacralization creates new forms of disorder. When political authority loses its sacred foundation, it must justify itself through ideology or force. When education abandons wisdom for information, it produces technically skilled barbarians capable of great destruction but incapable of wisdom about human purposes. When art rejects beauty for novelty, It loses its capacity to elevate souls toward transcendent reality and becomes complicit in spiritual degradation. Chapter 3: Political Substitutes for Sacred Experience. When genuine sacred experience disappears from a civilization, the human need for transcendence does not disappear with it. It seeks fulfillment through political substitutes that promise ultimate meaning through earthly transformation. This is the crucial insight for understanding contemporary political chaos. The most destructive political movements of our time are driven not by rational interest but by misdirected religious impulses seeking satisfaction through secular salvation projects. Examine the structure of modern revolutionary movements, and you will discover the unmistakable pattern of religious experience translated into political action. The communist promise of a classless society mirrors the Christian hope of divine kingdom, but locates fulfillment entirely within historical process. The Nazi vision of racial purification echoes religious themes of purity and corruption, but directs them toward biological rather than spiritual transformation. The democratic faith in popular sovereignty resembles religious confidence in divine providence, but substitutes the will of the people for the will of God. These political substitutes possess the emotional intensity of religious experience because they are religious experience, but misdirected toward impossible goals. The revolutionary believes in his cause with the fervor of a medieval mystic because his political ideology has become his functional religion. The progressive activist pursues social justice with religious devotion because social transformation has become his path to salvation. The nationalist serves his nation with absolute loyalty because the state has become his God, demanding sacrifices that only genuine transcendence can justify. Yet these substitutes inevitably disappoint because they promise what political action cannot deliver: ultimate meaning, perfect justice, complete fulfillment of human longing. No earthly revolution can eliminate human suffering rooted in the fundamental conditions of existence. No political system can create perfect beings from creatures constituted by the tension between temporal and eternal. No social reform can satisfy the soul's deepest longings for participation in infinite reality. When these promised deliverances fail to materialize, the believer faces a stark choice: acknowledge the limitations of political action and seek transcendent sources of meaning, or intensify efforts to force reality to conform to ideological demands. The second choice creates the characteristic pathologies of modern political life: the endless radicalization of revolutionary movements that explains why every revolution devours its own children, the totalitarian effort to reshape human nature through terror and propaganda, and the violent suppression of evidence that contradicts ideological faith. The choice for intensification creates the pathological dynamics we observe in contemporary politics. When politics becomes religion, political opponents become heretics deserving destruction rather than fellow citizens deserving respect. When the state becomes God, resistance to state power becomes blasphemy requiring elimination. When ideology becomes truth, contrary evidence becomes enemy propaganda to be suppressed rather than data to be considered. Consider how personally you may have experienced this dynamic in your own political engagement. Have you ever found yourself investing political causes with ultimate significance, as if the success or failure of your preferred policies would determine the fundamental meaning of existence? Have you ever felt that your political opponents were not merely wrong but evil, deserving contempt rather than respectful disagreement? Have you ever treated electoral outcomes as cosmic victories or defeats rather than temporary arrangements in ongoing democratic deliberation? These experiences reveal how easily political engagement can become substitute religion when genuine sacred orientation is lost. The energy that belongs to transcendent worship gets redirected toward temporal causes that cannot bear the weight of ultimate commitment. The result is political fanaticism that destroys the very democratic processes it claims to serve, as citizens treat political disagreement as religious warfare requiring total victory rather than prudential judgment requiring compromise and moderation. Chapter 4: The Gnostic Structure of Political Chaos. The political chaos of our time follows a specific pattern that I have identified as fundamentally Gnostic in structure. Understanding this Gnostic element is crucial because it reveals why contemporary political disorder resists rational solution and tends toward ever greater extremism. Gnosticism represents a particular deformation of consciousness that rejects the given structure of reality in favor of a constructed alternative that promises escape from the fundamental conditions of human existence through special knowledge and transformative action. The Gnostic consciousness begins with alienation from reality as it actually exists. Instead of accepting the constitutional structure of existence, including its limitations, uncertainties, suffering, and the permanent tension between human desire and cosmic order, the Gnostic seeks to transcend these conditions through special knowledge, gnosis, that promises transformation of reality itself. This knowledge is not the wisdom that accepts reality's structure while seeking to live well within it, but rather a technique for reshaping existence according to human desire and will. Modern political movements exhibit this Gnostic structure when they promise to eliminate through political action the permanent problems of human existence. Poverty, inequality, conflict, suffering, mortality, all the conditions that traditional wisdom accepted as requiring spiritual rather than political responses, become problems to be solved through the right political program implemented with sufficient determination and resources. The Gnostic politician promises not merely better government but transformation of human nature itself, creating new kinds of human beings freed from the limitations that have constrained all previous history. This Gnostic promise creates what I observed in my analysis of totalitarian movements during my years of exile and study, the characteristic oscillation between wild optimism about revolutionary possibilities and destructive rage when reality refuses to conform to ideological demands. When the promised transformation fails to materialize, as it inevitably must, since it promises the impossible, the believer concludes that reality itself is evil and must be destroyed to make way for the constructed alternative. Hence we observe the revolutionaries' hatred of tradition, which represents the accumulated wisdom about living within reality's actual structure. Hence the progressives' contempt for human nature as it has manifested throughout history, requiring reconstruction through education, therapy, and social engineering. Hence the totalitarians' war against existence itself, seeking to eliminate every trace of transcendent order that reminds consciousness of its constitutional dependence on realities beyond human control. The Gnostic structure also explains the intellectual dishonesty characteristic of contemporary political discourse. When one's political program promises ultimate salvation through historical action, any means become justified in its pursuit. Truth becomes subordinate to effectiveness in advancing the cause. Opponents are not merely wrong about practical matters but evil enemies of salvation who must be defeated by any means necessary. Compromise becomes betrayal of ultimate truth rather than prudential adjustment among competing goods. The normal processes of democratic deliberation break down because participants are not seeking good government within the constraints of human nature and political possibility, but salvation itself through the total transformation of existence. When politics becomes the vehicle for religious fulfillment, political defeat becomes apocalyptic catastrophe requiring desperate measures to prevent or reverse. This Gnostic deformation of political consciousness creates what appears to be political chaos but is actually the logical consequence of misdirected spiritual energy seeking through political action what can only be found through authentic participation in transcendent reality. The violence, irrationality, and extremism that characterize contemporary politics result not from the absence of religious commitment but from religious commitment directed toward impossible goals through inappropriate means. Chapter 5: The Multiplication of Competing Salvations. As traditional sacred order dissolves, we witness not the emergence of rational secular politics but rather the proliferation of competing secular religions, each promising its own version of earthly salvation. This multiplication of salvific ideologies creates the peculiar chaos of contemporary political life, not the absence of religious passion but its fragmentation into mutually hostile substitutes that tear society apart in their competing claims to ultimate truth and exclusive paths to fulfillment. Consider the contemporary American political landscape, and you will observe this dynamic with crystalline clarity. Progressivism promises salvation through social justice and equality, treating every form of hierarchy or inequality as evil to be eliminated through government action. Conservatism offers salvation through traditional values and limited government, treating departure from founding principles as corruption requiring restoration through political activism. Libertarianism preaches salvation through individual freedom and market mechanisms, treating government intervention as the source of all social pathology requiring elimination through constitutional reform. But the fragmentation extends far beyond these broad categories. Environmentalism proclaims salvation through ecological restoration, treating industrial civilization as fallen state requiring redemption through sustainable living. Feminism promises salvation through gender equality, treating patriarchal structures as original sin requiring elimination through consciousness raising and legal reform. Critical race theory offers salvation through racial justice, treating white supremacy as systematic evil requiring deconstruction through institutional transformation. Each movement possesses the intensity and absolute commitment characteristic of religious faith because each has become a functional religion for its adherents. Each has its sacred texts, founding documents that cannot be questioned, its orthodox interpretations, politically correct positions that must be affirmed, its heretics, those who deviate from approved positions, and its promised salvation, the transformation that will solve fundamental human problems. The result is not democratic deliberation among citizens seeking common good through prudential judgment, but religious warfare conducted through political means. Participants in these movements do not seek compromise because one does not compromise with salvation itself. They do not acknowledge legitimate opposition because error has no rights against truth. They do not accept electoral defeat gracefully because their cause transcends ordinary political calculation and requires ultimate victory. This fragmentation of salvific ideologies explains the increasing polarization and institutional breakdown we observe across Western democracies. When every political position becomes a matter of ultimate meaning, normal democratic processes become impossible. Elections become crusades for cosmic significance. Policy disagreements become battles between good and evil. Political opponents become enemies of salvation who must be defeated by any means necessary, including violence if other means fail. The irony is profound and tragic. The very attempt to eliminate religious authority from politics has not created secular rationality but rather religious chaos. Instead of one transcendent authority that orders political life toward genuine goods while maintaining proper distinctions between temporal and eternal concerns, we have multiple competing pseudo-transcendences that tear political life apart in their mutual antagonism. Furthermore, each of these political religions exhibits the characteristic deformation of gnostic consciousness, the promise to eliminate through political action the permanent limitations of human existence. None acknowledges that the deepest human problems, suffering, mortality, the tension between individual desire and social requirement, the gap between human aspiration and achievement, cannot be solved by any political arrangement but requires spiritual response through participation in transcendent reality. Can you recognize this pattern in your own political engagement? Do you find yourself treating political causes as matters of ultimate significance that brook no compromise? Do you experience political disagreement as fundamental threat to your understanding of reality rather than normal difference of opinion among citizens of goodwill? These experiences reveal how political substitutes for sacred experience fragment consciousness and social order alike. Chapter 6: The Recovery of Sacred Political Consciousness. The chaos resulting from the loss of sacred foundation is not irreversible, but recovery requires nothing less than the restoration of authentic transcendent orientation in both individual consciousness and political order. This recovery cannot be achieved through political action alone. It requires what classical philosophy called anamnesis, the remembering of fundamental experiences that have been forgotten or suppressed in the disorder of modernity. The path forward leads not through new political programs but through rediscovery of permanent truths about human nature and cosmic order. The first step in this recovery is recognizing that political order depends upon spiritual order, not the reverse. This represents a fundamental reversal of modern assumptions that treat political arrangements as primary and spiritual concerns as private preferences irrelevant to public life. No amount of constitutional engineering or institutional reform can create authentic political order if the souls of citizens remain disordered. The attempt to solve spiritual problems through political means inevitably produces greater disorder because it treats symptoms while ignoring the disease. Authentic political order emerges from the recognition that human beings participate in a reality that transcends temporal existence while providing its meaning and direction. This participation creates the hierarchy of being that orders both individual souls and political communities. When citizens acknowledge their dependence upon transcendent reality, they gain both the humility to accept limitations imposed by human nature and cosmic structure, and the courage to pursue genuine goods that approximate eternal justice within temporal constraints. This recovery requires what I have termed a return to classical political philosophy, not as historical curiosity studied in academic departments, but as living wisdom that reveals permanent truths about human nature and political order accessible to contemporary consciousness. When Plato described the philosopher king, he was not proposing a practical political program for implementation in actual cities, but revealing the spiritual qualification necessary for authentic political authority, the vision of transcendent good that provides the standard for judging temporal arrangements. When Aristotle analyzed the varieties of political order in his Politics, he was showing how different constitutional arrangements either support or undermine human flourishing understood in its full spiritual dimension. His concept of the good life, eudaimonia, includes material prosperity but transcends it to encompass the cultivation of virtue and contemplation of eternal truth. Political order serves human flourishing by creating conditions that support this integral development of human potential. The Christian tradition provides another crucial resource for this recovery through its understanding of political authority as participation in divine governance. The Augustinian synthesis distinguishes between the city of God and the earthly city while maintaining their proper relationship. Temporal authority serves eternal purposes by maintaining justice and peace that allows souls to pursue their ultimate destiny. When political power acknowledges its subordination to divine justice, it gains both legitimacy and limitation. The ruler becomes servant of transcendent order rather than constructor of arbitrary will. This does not require the establishment of theocracy, which represents another form of Gnostic confusion between temporal and eternal realms, but rather the recovery of what I call islands of order, communities, institutions, and individuals who maintain authentic relationship with transcendent reality and thereby provide models for broader social restoration. These islands preserve the experiences and symbols that make possible the eventual renewal of political order on sacred foundations. The task is not to impose religious authority upon secular society through political force, but to demonstrate through lived example the ordering power of authentic transcendent orientation. When human beings rediscover their constitutional relationship with divine reality, they naturally create forms of association that reflect this fundamental order, families that embody love and sacrifice, communities that pursue common good, institutions that serve human flourishing rather than mere efficiency or power. Chapter 7. Living in Tension Between Temporal and Eternal. The ultimate response to political chaos created by the loss of sacred foundation is not the construction of perfect political order, which would represent another form of Gnostic immanentization, but learning to live authentically in the tension between temporal existence and eternal reality. This tension, properly understood and maintained, provides the spiritual foundation that makes authentic political order possible while preventing the idolatrous confusion of political means with ultimate ends that characterizes both revolutionary utopianism and reactionary nostalgia. This tension means accepting that political action, however necessary and valuable for human flourishing, cannot provide ultimate meaning or satisfaction for the deepest human longings. The soul's desire for perfect justice, complete truth, and eternal life points beyond any possible political achievement toward transcendent reality that grounds and judges all temporal order. Political engagement becomes authentic when it seeks approximations of divine order while acknowledging the permanent incompleteness of all human achievement within historical time. Living in this tension requires what classical philosophy called Sophrosyne, the moderation that comes from understanding one's place in the cosmic order. The citizen who maintains proper relationship with transcendent reality approaches political questions with both seriousness and detachment. Seriousness because political decisions affect human flourishing and the common good. Detachment because no political outcome can provide ultimate fulfillment or solve the fundamental problems of human existence. This stance protects against both the Gnostic inflation that treats politics as salvation and the cynical withdrawal that abandons political responsibility altogether. The person oriented toward transcendent reality engages in political life as an act of love for fellow human beings who share the common condition of existence in tension between time and eternity. This love motivates participation in the imperfect work of temporal justice while maintaining hope in ultimate justice that transcends human achievement. Such engagement naturally tends toward justice, mercy, and prudence because these virtues flow from authentic participation in divine order. The transcendently oriented citizen seeks policies that support human flourishing understood in its full spiritual dimension, material prosperity, yes, but also moral development, intellectual cultivation, aesthetic appreciation, and religious freedom that allows souls to pursue their ultimate destiny. Political judgments become exercises in practical wisdom rather than ideological commitment. Furthermore, this tension provides the critical distance necessary for genuine political judgment. When citizens maintain primary orientation toward transcendent reality, they can evaluate political claims according to their approximation to eternal justice rather than their service to partisan interests or ideological commitments. They can support good policies regardless of their partisan source and oppose bad policies regardless of their popular appeal. The cultivation of this tension requires practices that maintain connection with transcendent reality in the midst of temporal engagement, contemplation that opens consciousness to divine presence, prayer that acknowledges dependence on ultimate reality, philosophical investigation that seeks truth beyond ideological construction, artistic creation that mediates beauty from transcendent source, and moral action that seeks goods beyond immediate self-interest. These practices create what might be called spiritual resistance to the disorder of modernity, not political resistance in the ordinary sense, but the deeper resistance of souls that refuse to accept substitutes for authentic transcendence. This resistance manifests in the quiet refusal to treat temporal goods as ultimate, political outcomes as final, or ideological positions as absolute truth. Can you cultivate this tension in your own political engagement? Can you care deeply about political outcomes while maintaining primary orientation toward realities that transcend political calculation? Can you work for justice while acknowledging that perfect justice belongs to God alone? Can you hope for better political arrangements while finding ultimate hope in transcendent reality? This is the spiritual discipline that makes possible both authentic political order and personal integrity in disordered times. Conclusion. The political chaos of our time reveals itself, upon sustained philosophical investigation, to be the inevitable consequence of a more fundamental disorder, the loss of sacred consciousness that provides the only adequate foundation for authentic political order. This chaos will not be resolved through better techniques of political management, more sophisticated institutional arrangements, or more effective ideological programs. but only through the recovery of humanity's constitutional relationship with transcendent reality that grounds and orders all genuine community. Yet this recovery remains eternally possible because the sacred dimension of existence cannot be permanently destroyed by human rejection or cultural forgetfulness. The experiences of transcendent reality that grounded the great civilizations of the past, classical Greece, medieval Christendom, the American founding, remain available to consciousness willing to receive them. The divine ground continues to call human beings toward authentic participation in cosmic order, regardless of contemporary cultural resistance. This rediscovery begins with individual souls willing to acknowledge their participation in reality greater than temporal existence and extends naturally to communities that embody this recognition in their common life. The renewal of political order flows from the renewal of spiritual order, not the reverse. As persons rediscover their orientation toward transcendent truth, they create islands of authentic order that may serve as seeds for broader civilizational renewal. The ultimate hope lies not in political solutions but in the inexhaustible reality of divine order that continues to call human consciousness toward authentic participation in transcendent truth, justice, and beauty. This calling provides both the possibility and the responsibility for creating communities of order that witness to eternal realities in temporal existence, offering hope for the eventual restoration of sacred foundations of human community.